Welcome to the One Inside, an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sullenberger. On today's podcast, I talk with Payam about the relationship with Sacred Psychedelic Medicines. Hey everyone, welcome. I'm super excited to talk with Payam. Payam and I actually talked a whole lot before we sat down to record the episode. So I'll just quickly say that Payam is a psychedelic, somatic, internal family systems practitioner who interfaces with various traditional and non traditional psychedelic compounds in the treatment of trauma and chronic pain. I want you to know that we start with a prayer, and the audio is a little bit funky, but right after the prayer, we adjust things and the audio is fine from there on out. One of the things that I love that Payam actually doesn't say till the very end is the idea that combining IFS with psychedelics, he calls it healing the thorn in our soul. And I thought that was beautiful. I hope you will listen to the very end. Check out Payam's website at Payam, Payam.com. You can also check him out on Instagram at Payam_healing. You can connect with me on the One Inside Facebook page. You can get a free Get to Know I Should Part meditation at tammysullenberger.com. You can buy my book, The One Inside, 30 Days to Your Authentic Self on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you get books. Enjoy. Hi. So normally I start with where are you in the world and what would you
Right.
see if you looked out your nearest window? Let's
Mm,
do there. Let's
yeah.
start there.
Well, why don't I start with a prayer first, because that's how I start any ceremony or any serious talk, and then we can go from there. And
Perfect.
it's important, I think, also to record this, because this is part of acknowledging some people who may be listening.
Great.
Beloved Mother Earth, Sacred Father Sky, and Great Spirit, the Spirit of Otak, the Spirit of Quetzalcoatl, the Spirit of Aya, the Spirit of Hape, the Spirit of the Fungi. I honor you and thank you, giving us our bodies and our minds, the medicines we consume, so that we heal. I honor my teachers, John Fontana Cliff, Dr. John Douglas Ramdas. I honor with wisdom keepers, Richard Schwartz, Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Frank Anderson, Dr. Peter Levine. Thank you for your wisdom, your guidance. For without you and your work, I wouldn't be here. I honor my family, my spirit brothers and my sisters. Thank you for your support and your guidance. I honor you, Tammy, for the work that you do, for offering a platform so that we may speak honestly and truthfully about the nature of mind, the body, so that we can. I honor the seekers. Without courage and without pain, you could not be here on this path of healing. I honor the therapists who support them, but without you, we would all be broken, yet we are on the path of healing. Pray that we may learn from each other, hold discourse honorably, respectfully, so that we may learn from one another and encourage all others to embark on the path of healing. Oh,
Beautiful. Thank you. So from there, that was beautiful. I can feel myself just softening and after just a very wild ride of a day, just feels more connected. I feel more connected to myself. I feel more connected to you. I feel more connected to the divine. So thank you. I feel more open to have a good, fun conversation with you too.
Likewise.
Where are you in the world? And what would you see if you looked out your nearest window?
So I'm in California right now, looking at the San Ynez Mountains, some palm trees. Pacific is on my left, on a slice of heaven. Just getting ready to talk to a big audience on Saturday.
And where are you talking on Saturday?
I'm talking to the California Nurse Anesthetists Association annual conference about the nature of psychedelics and pain. So it's a really big deal. I think I have an audience of 500 people, which is probably the biggest audience I've ever spoken to.
Do you like speaking? So you're speaking at Berkeley for 500 people about
Yeah,
psychedelics,
yeah.
and this is something that you do all over the world. Am I getting that correct?
I'm starting to be invited all over the world. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So I'm going to be in Rio de Janeiro next year, speaking to an audience of South American doctors and Central American doctors. I just came back from Costa Rica when we spoke. That's where I also gave a talk at a conference on the nature of hernia and chronic pain and psychedelics.
Mm,
So it's fortunately I'm finding an audience and certainly want to speak to the appropriate audience. One of which is obviously the IFS community and therapists.
yeah,
But I find that doctors obviously have the credentials and are respected by society in a way where if they start to listen and at least give the platform on which I can stand and speak about the nature of this work, perhaps in the future, not anytime soon, they may be able to incorporate some of this wisdom in their practice. And the medical world is very complicated in that they're very focused on the organ or the specific pain. There's no integrative well-being or practice where different practitioners speak to one another and help the whole person. So I certainly want to speak to the nature of that and just expand the mind of people so that they have access to other means of healing that may be outside of the reach of their particular profession or practice.
yeah.
Yeah,
And what has, as much as you feel comfortable sharing,
yeah,
what has brought you to this work? I know you have so much passion for this work. And so, how would you feel about just sort of sharing some of your history and some of what's brought you
yeah,
to be so passionate
yeah,
about this?
yeah. I was talking to a doctor, actually, a therapist in Canada yesterday about my work, and he got the memo with the medicines, and he speaks more about the whole system, the nervous system, all the trauma that's really stored in our bodies, and how pills are just a temporary means of alleviating the suffering, but underneath that, unless those emotions, those energies, those very much suppressed traumas that may be lying in us or addressed and healed will continue on being suffering, which was the case for me, having had severe childhood trauma that was blocked out of my mind, and years of, and trauma built on top of that, displacement, dislocation, war, bullying. I had it all. And I basically was at a road where um, I just wanted to stop living. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how were the medicines, which we should probably tell people what you mean by that, but
Yeah.
how were the medicines part of your healing? Like how part
Yeah.
of your journey from going from being suicidal to
Yeah.
speaking all over the world to
Yeah.
doctors about your passion?
Yeah. Well, I worked with, there's certain medicines I won't mention the name of because they're super powerful and it takes a lot of responsibility and care to work with them. So I'm very careful not to mention certain medicines because I certainly don't want the audience to, go and resort to working with these medicines without the proper care. But what I will say is I worked with the strongest entheogen known to man, and that medicine is essentially ripped open my wounds, ripped open my body, and ripped open my mind, and showed me what it was. It was done in a very careless fashion. It was not supported. There was a lot of dangerous practices in retrospect that I now would never employ in my work. So having noticed and seen that, and obviously gone through my own process, and having had a shamanic initiation and so forth, which was a process I wasn't even familiar with. But long story short, I needed to find out how to bridge the gap, if you will, from shamanic or non-Western practices, and a framework from the West, or frameworks from the West, that help bridge the gap of that experience for me, and also being able to support people in a way I needed to support myself. Luckily, I had the support through friends and resources that I was able to handle what came up and didn't throw myself off a bridge, because that in of itself was a very traumatic experience.
Mm.
So I searched for a long time. I was hip to Dr. Gabor Mate's work, and on Gabor's, there was a YouTube talk, and someone who was a therapist had mentioned IFS, and I was like, what the hell is that? So I went and found IFS, and the framework works, but it still has its limitations. So I started to understand what within a framework worked and what within a framework didn't necessarily work. And specifically also for my practice, remember, while people are talking about psychedelics and IFS, the psychedelics that they're currently using is basically ketamine, obviously, MDMA, and psilocybin soon hopefully becoming available. But it's very, very complicated. It may take a person their entire life to learn one medicine, let alone understand the framework with which they can work to that medicine in the Western world with Western seekers. I don't call people clients and patients. So,
Seekers, I like it. Okay,
yeah,
seekers.
we're all seeking.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so you found out about IFS, and you're like, these are two things that you're not they're trying to marry them, but you're like, these are two have become two really passionate models. Can I call it I don't want to call it a model, but two healing modalities. That probably even sounds too clinical,
If
probably.
I may add to that, so IFS is a great tool. Somatic experience, the wisdom of SE is a great tool. And then incorporating the wisdom of non-Western, as in yogic practices, breath work, understanding the energetic body, understanding that we're one unit. I will say this most respectfully to the audience, to Richard, and to you and everyone that's listening. I don't mean to disparage the work of anyone, and I honor that. But I find that what's troubling for me with IFS is a very top-down process. As in, what do you notice? What do you notice in and out of your body? Well, that is a practitioner talking to a mind, and the mind witness the body. But the body in of itself has tremendous amount of wisdom, wisdom that we are not even attuned to. Remember, 80% of our nervous system is the body, which communicates to the mind, and we're not attuned to that. Sometimes the medicines that I work with open up the body, and I can get into the structural body, the body parts, IFS, somatic IFS, and then the mental parts and those contracts and those relationships. So it's important to acknowledge, again, that we're one whole unit, though we are mostly separated at the head and we're on our thinking heads. So IFS works as a good foundation and an understanding. I think Robert Falconer has gotten the memo on some things that he even speaks to and says, Richard thinks I'm nuts, but Robert's got the memo. And I know that we're all spirit people, all of us, and every single one of us were connected. We just forgot.
So the medicines, one of the things the medicines do is open up the body. And do you think my language would be, it relaxes the mind, sort of the observing mind? That's kind of who we're talking to when we're doing like the IFS protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I'll talk to the audience and to you about certain medicines that they, and remember, I'm speaking in terms of medicines. I don't mention them as drugs. And let's make that distinguishing remark. People can use these medicines to run from themselves or to get higher than self. And getting higher than self is actually not a problem. In my view, we have many different selves. Okay. Or these medicines can be used to go within and look inside and experience the self and the physical self, the emotional self, the small s, the capital S, and the many selves above that. If they gain access to it, and we can talk on that. But it's important to make that this distinction and understand that MDMA can be used to party with. Psilocybin can be used to party with, or worked with this in an appropriate fashion, with care, with understanding, with someone who has a relationship. And this is another very important factor that I want to stress. It's relational work, as you know, right? If someone walks into the office with you, immediately you're feeling their energy, their nervous system, their breath, skin tone. Are they blushed? Are they frozen? You start to notice all these factors, and a lot of it, the 80% of your body starts to notice without you even attuning to it, unless you're thinking it, right?
Yeah.
Relational. And so what is our relationship with these medicines? So as facilitators, as therapists, one of the things that I encourage people to think about, and these are pebbles that I'm throwing in the pond for inner inquiry, because these are long conversations that should be had and need to be had for people who will step into the space of working with these medicines in a therapeutic fashion, to understand, what does it mean when he says, what is my relationship with MDMA? Every shaman, they have a relationship with the medicine. They understand its nature, they understand its story, they understand its wisdom, they understand their experience with the wisdom of the medicine. They understand themselves. They know their wounding, they know their pain, they know their suffering, they work through it. So there's no transference or counter-transference, especially when the energetic field of the body and the mind and the spirit dissolve in medicine space. So what is yours and what is not yours? Okay. And then what is the seeker's relationship with the medicine, or themselves? Let's begin with that. And then what is the relationship to the medicine? How is that relationship forged? And so it's a very, very deep process of understanding. It needs to be taken care of and really respected.
Yeah. So is that one of the things that you is not your favorite? That's my phrase I love with my son. I'll be like, well, that's not my favorite. So is something that's not your favorite the way Western medical Western, I don't know how to say this, the way these medicines are being used in the West right now? Sort
Yeah,
of, yeah, like kind of because then there isn't, yeah, do you want to say more about that? Because
sure.
there isn't really a relationship
Yeah,
between the seeker and the medicine, and maybe even the
yeah,
seeker and the one that's administrating the medicine. And
yeah,
um, so
yeah,
yeah, do you want to speak to
yeah.
that?
To preface again what I'm about to say, I speak respectfully, and I hope that the audience understands this. And I want to acknowledge first and foremost the medical model and how restrictive it is. People are beholden to certain rules, certain protocols, these containers that they create, controlled environments. Those, to me, are the antithesis of what medicine work is about. And the reason why I'm pushing the limit of maybe the understanding of the paradigm is because it is you, the Western practitioners, or the people that are doing the psychedelic studies, or researchers who are at the forefront of this work. And I understand that they may have limitations like this, limitations where they can't even use IFS in practice. I mean, that to me is mental, because the whole idea about working with these medicines is to undo the chains of our minds and our bodies, undo the chains of our consciousness, undo the chains of our bodies in a physical space. Yet they create a controlled space whereby they can measure these almost immeasurable, ineffable spiritual experiences that cannot be measured. So there's a lot of problematic things that I see that should be discussed and conversed over. And Richard, if you're listening, Frank, if you're listening, Robert, if you're listening, let's sit down and have a conversation, because I think it's important that we all sit together in brotherhood or in sisterhood and family, take medicine together, learn from one another, because it's a very, very complex system.
Yeah.
And when it's corrupted by Western interests, by the medical model, who has a financial interest, and people, I understand, need to be supported, but that that motivation is almost entirely flawed in my view.
Yeah. So, you're what I'm hearing you say is the way the medicines work and the way they're meant to work. It's almost the opposite of how we're using them in these sort of clinics or in the way it's being used right now. It's actually not the way the medicines were meant to work and how they do work, the
Yeah.
most benefit of them.
Yeah. And let's make another distinction. Okay. We're talking about shamanic medicines like ayahuasca, psilocybin, other compounds, peyote, San Pedro. These have long, long histories that have been used for, I would say, hundreds of thousands of years in my view. Okay. The consciousness or the sentience of these medicines manifest themselves in this way on this planet, but sentience and source is everywhere. Multi galaxies, it's everything and everyone, and even the monitor that I'm talking to you is in essence part of the sentience. Okay, and then there is the synthetics. So we were talking about MDMA, ketamine, LSD, which don't have a history, if you will. Right. So MAPS has created a protocol, which I think is a good start. But again, what I'm trying to point to is that the human being body is the satellite of wisdom, is the satellite of ascension, excuse me. It is all within us, and we're connected to source. So whatever medicine you use, whether it's shamanic medicine that's been around for hundreds of thousands of years that has its own particular way of working with you, or synthetics, which essentially align you and get you into this unified field of consciousness where you're stepping out of the body mind and you're witnessing yourself. And then you get to a place of witnessing the witnesser, witnessing itself, which we can get to, which is, I think, really critical, which goes back to the theory of IFS and mind as opposed to being out of mind. Ram Dass said, if you're in thought, you're just one thought away from being it. So with self-referential, we're still in the self-referential space, even if we're in IFS. Now, if we're doing work that's a lot deeper with medicines, depending on who the person is, who the seeker is, what is showing up, we can eventually get into a place of the witnesser witnessing himself or herself, which is really then the big work that starts to happen.
I love that. Okay, can we talk about that?
Sure.
Can we talk about that? And do you feel like the medicines help? I mean, you feel like the medicines help us go beyond sort of witnessing the witnesser, but do you feel like IFS doesn't do it? You're not going to say it this strongly, but that like the authentic self witnessing parts, this, I'm going to say it this way, is like not
Sure.
enough, or is it not getting us where we want to go? You're not saying
Okay.
that, but I'm
Yeah.
wondering about
Well,
that.
I'm going to back up a little bit and then break this down a little bit more, if that's okay with you, so that the audience and you may understand what I'm talking about. Okay. So if you consider the structural part, and then you talk about the body parts, and then you think about the mental parts, right? There are three distinctly different components of the being, in addition to the energetic, right? The energy that flows through us, the energy that may be trapped. Remember, if you're in a somatic experience and there's a rupture or there's a trauma and the energy hasn't completed itself and is stuck in us, right? Stuck in our nervous system, all that, you understand that language, okay? Now, one of the primary problems that I have, for instance, with the Western approach, which is just give them a whole bunch of medicine, send them off the edge, and let go and let God, which to me is irresponsible at best, and I'm using the words gently here. Okay.
Yeah.
There is backlash from protectors. Protectors may turn up in medicine and do the backlash while it's happening. The body may get sick or it may get violent. They may have visions that are scary, if you will, or experiences that show up that are actually fighting the medicine to prevent the psyche or parts of the mind to witness what the exiles are holding on to. It's not our responsibility and our duty to re-traumatize people. So giving a high dose, like the Western approach of more is better, is completely flawed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So why do I say this? Because if the right conditions are met, if the relationships are correct, if the structures are addressed, if the body parts are addressed, if the mental parts are addressed, and a lot of things do turn up, but a lot of things are hidden because the body is still in common consensus reality when these preparatory meetings are done with the therapists who are using IFS to build the roadmap and trailheads, and all those things are important. I'm not diminishing it. I'm using the language, and I certainly use that. But they're the monsters, if you will, the shadows. They're the dark side, the structures, the protectors that we are not even conscious of that live in us. So we give a medicine, and the route of administration, the route of administration or admission, if you will, you're admitting a medicine into your body. Those in themselves can be an obstruction to receiving the medicine. For instance, when you think about MDMA or you think about psilocybin, well, the Western approach, if you take a pill, swallow it, see on the other side. There's many, many different medicines that, again, I won't mention. Some of them require you to burn your skin to receive the medicine. Some may be part of inhaling the medicine. Some of it may be ingesting, and the protectors may live in the stomach and puke it out because the body's not ready. The mind is not ready. So how do we ready the body? How do we work with the body? How do we work with the gateway in order to safely allow the body, perhaps to begin with, to release some of these energetic traumas that are residing within us, just to meet those, to understand what these vibrations, these shakings, these purgings, if you will, the screams, the purges, the tears, what do those mean? What is arising underneath those? Let's meet that before we push someone off the edge, because that is not the way to go.
Yeah. And what you're seeing is that the Western approach, I like that term. I was having a hard time finding the term. The Western approach is pushing people off the edge, and then there's a lot of protector backlash, and it's not really honoring it's
Absolutely.
actually harming people.
Yeah. Well, even me, and I'm doing this very, very carefully in a very measured way over many days. So I sit with someone for 4 or 5 days. So once they step through the door, we're in ceremony, and a lot of things unfold. You see the full range of spectrum, the range of spectrum of the person, and as they're presenting all facets of being, in all states of being, in all states of being of mind, right? So I've even seen it, and again, doing careful work, protectors are like, nah, screw you. We're going to purge this out. And no, we're working with someone very, very carefully and working with them, and they're having a relationship with them in this and really big realizations. And then they come out, and 4 days later, they're back into behaving the exact same way they realize they shouldn't be behaving in medicine because certain protectors weren't addressed or updated. Now, I work in a certain fashion with someone over a certain period of time. And if, like this one person that I worked with is a very intelligent surgeon, and did my call follow up, and he's like, Payam, I can't continue on this. I got what I needed, and basically don't call me anymore. And that was it. And this is done in a very safe, sacred fashion. Now, remember, you put someone in a chair, blindfold them, wrap blankets around them, put them in a sterile room, and music piping through their ears, and then send them on their way and put them in a car on the 405 freeway stuck in a traffic jam. Imagine what that does to someone. So you have to be very, very careful.
Yeah. What do you think happened with the surgeon that said, no, thank you?
I think that sometimes people are not ready to witness themselves truly, because that dismantles the entire matrix of their life. Remember, and again, this is very, very important work. Traditionally, this was done in a village. The village upheld the person. They sat in ceremony as a group or individually. There was a system around them that supported them, and that system could be dismantled and adjusted in a way where it allowed for the healing of the person the way it needed to be healed. Now, what system are we in? We're dislocated, displaced, isolated, working in jobs we hate to work. This is Gabor's talking, but this is very much, the four disconnections. We're disconnected from nature, our sense of purpose, our families. So then we come out, don't really know what to do with what just arose. And the system's still there. You still have to go back to the office and do the work. You can't be sitting there talking to spirits because they arrived, to your colleague or your boss because they may refer you to HR and a mental health care person. So what do you do with that? So again, the essence of this work is absolutely critical and it's sacred and beyond the sacredness of what has been brought up in your show thus far, because it encapsulates and encompasses a lot more. We are not in isolation and we don't exist in a vacuum. We just don't take medicine and walk out and be like, well, I'm perfect. Now I can go on living my life. No, that's not it.
What about microdosing? What do you think about that? About the idea of taking like a little bit, sort of like, so I don't think that you're sort of even getting therapy necessarily, but sort of you're just like taking little bits as you live your life, like as you go to the office.
Yeah, sure. I don't work with microdosing protocols. So I can't intelligently speak about that. What I will say about that though is people are using various tools and various medicines to address, subdue. So the parts of us that are anxious, the parts of us that are depressive, I'll take a Zoloft. And again, this goes back to the therapist that may be listening, because I have worked with therapists, and I'm not disparaging them or anyone who's taking medication. I certainly was on them. Gabor mentions it, but these medications are just suppressing, in my view, the screaming that these manager parts that are trying to express themselves through anxiety, through depression, and the depressive parts and the parts that are depressed and all that. But people resort to these because they have to be operational. They have to go into the office and work and provide for their family and medicate themselves with a pill, or medicate themselves with alcohol, or medicate themselves with drugs or sex, or whatever those addictions are, to soothe the underlying pain. But it never goes away.
Yeah. You and I spoke before about how this is deeply effective, ancient, sacred medicine, and that in the Western approach of using this medicine, there isn't listening to the wisdom of the medicine.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I'll try not to lose audience. But let's break it down very simply. Turmeric is an anti-inflammatory, correct? The root has a purpose, it has a wisdom. It has a wisdom that affects our bodies. Okay. Mm-hmm. Plant medicine has a sentience. Not only do they have a wisdom, they have a sentience. So what does that even mean? Well, let's just say that they know. They know beyond what you know. And there's a sentience and a connection that helps you connect the greater divine and the essential self that has no self. It's the immaterial God consciousness, if you will. And Mother Earth is sentient. Native Americans talk about that, but everything that we would consume comes from Mother Earth. She supports us. Everything that Mother Earth has offered us gives us a path to our own healing, or the path of our own inner destruction. Unfortunately, I find that we're on the latter path than the former path.
So do you think, I love that, that's beautiful. Do you think then that if there is, so for people that are listening that are receiving these medicines in a Western approach, which would be if they're receiving the medicines, that's probably how they're receiving them versus, I mean, that's probably what's happening.
Yeah.
Is there, so what do you suggest, or what would you advise for people that are either receiving these medicines or working with these medicines, or doing both, right? Receiving the medicines themselves and working with people, working with seekers, and really have a desire to help people and use the medicines to really heal themselves and to heal others. But they're in the Western approach and sort of the Western model.
So let me just clarify your question so I can address that properly. So you're asking me about advice that I would give to therapists who are going to be stepping into the place of working with these medicines with seekers, or are you talking about seekers who are seeking the medicines, whether recreationally, underground, or with therapists? Because it's a two-folded question.
Can you answer both? Can you do like A and B?
Sure.
A is the therapist, B is the seeker.
Sure. Tammy, one of the troubling things, again, that I want to acknowledge, not to disparage, I want to acknowledge it in my own healing path, and want to acknowledge to people who want to step into the position of Western medicine facilitator as a therapist, if you will, is to deal with your own shit.
Yeah.
I'm saying shit because, yeah,
Yeah, you
I
can
try
say
not to
that.
curse, but deal with your own
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's how strongly you feel. Um, and I'm guessing is which IFS does that, right? Like IFS level 1 is dealing with your own shit. Right. And
Yeah,
yeah, and I have this conversation with people all the time. Like level 1 is not for you to, yeah, you learn the model, but it's for you to work on your own
yeah,
parts. And if you're going to
yeah,
be an IFS practitioner or therapist, that's a must. It's a must do.
yeah.
The whole anyways, I'm going to go off of that, but yes. So I'm
No, it's
100% in agreement with
yeah.
you.
So to go to the answer of A, but let me expound a little bit on that, if I may. Recently, I worked with a therapist, and she was completely dysregulated, taking uppers and downers, whether they were prescription or otherwise, and offering her help to a population that's vulnerable. Okay, so as a medicine man or a facilitator of shamanic medicine, that would never pass. That would never pass because you're broken. And in your brokenness, you cannot heal others. So what does it mean to deal with your own shit? It's really to unravel, really unravel. And I'm not asking for people to do this because that could unravel their lives, but to truly do this work in integrity and truly understand what this means, you have to dig and meet the darkest of the dark and meet it within energetically, emotionally, really understand your own self. Because it is through our own wounding that we heal, and then we can heal others. Okay? Unless we heal ourselves, unless we address our own inner wounds, unless those inner wounds are not addressed and healed, and so that they do not get triggered. Frank talks about, the therapist parts. Again, that to me is a mental construct, with due respect to Frank, Richard, and everyone else. But if you're working with these medicines, you really have to understand their nature. The only way to understand the nature of that is to relate with the medicine, so you can relate with yourself, and then eventually build a relationship with the medicines, so you can understand the nature of these medicines. It's like going to the kitchen and throwing a whole bunch of spices in a pot and some spaghetti and hoping that it works out and people eat it. If you don't know what you're serving, it may taste like shit, or even worse, it will make people sick.
Mm.
So that's the first part, is to really do deep healing, then establish a relationship with the medicine, so you understand what the nature of these medicines are, whether they're synthetic or organic, ultimately. And that goes into the embodied self. That goes into, what does it mean to work with the energetic body? What does it mean to work with how the energetic body works with the autonomic nervous system, how that may be manifesting, what's coming out. So it's very, very complex, and I can go on for days. But so that's a critical element for the group A part. And then the group B part, what I would say is that this is sacred work, and a facilitator needs to understand that. And for me, this is my life. I've given up many things and sacrificed a lot to do this. If you are a therapist and you think you're going to go check in at 1 and then be out of the office at 3 when the psilocybin wears off, you're mistaken. You should not be doing this work. Because when you open someone up, that's it. I've sat with people for 12 or 15 hours when the medicine should have been done 10 or 15 hours before that. Very short, and get very, very prolonged, protracted. You can't just leave. So there are these concerns of how do these medicines really get into someone? How do you work with them? So if someone is going to work with a therapist, understand, are they in it because they're in it with compassion and love? What is their intention for the work? Are they doing work with psychedelics because it's the hip thing to do, because it makes them popular or makes them rich? Or are they doing this because it is a deep understanding of the profundity of these experiences and how transformative they can be over a stretch of time, so that you can process, release, and heal and become whole? So that's one of the things. And again, it's not the panacea. It definitely elevates your experience, opens up gateways of body consciousness and mind consciousness that you would not get to otherwise. Unless you go sit in the Himalayas and meditate for 20 years, maybe you'll get there. But there's many ways that these medicines work, and they need to be treated with utmost respect. And people have to understand that, whether they're people in the position of serving these medicines or people who are in the position of receiving these medicines.
Beautiful. Okay. So one question that I had was, and you might have kind of already answered this question, but just to clarify, why do we need the medicine if we have a self?
How long do you have?
You have 5 minutes.
Well, I would say that one of the things that I always say to people who come to me is, I'm not the arbiter of your truth. And what I mean by that is, I don't get to decide what your truth is or what arises, because I can push you off the edge and you may see things that you're not ready for. Or we can work gently over a long period of time so you can meet these things, meet these woundings from these exiles, meet these protective parts and all that, and work with them gently. Okay. Having said that, I think everyone's entitled to be in the space that they're in. And if they choose suffering and pain, or if they don't know any other way, my mother, you have no idea how many times I've begged her to sit with me or sit with people that I trust and respect who work with other medicines, ketamine, for instance, because she has chronic pain, fibromyalgia, all childhood trauma. She's absolutely petrified. And this is her son speaking to this, and she knows what I do. There are people that may never ever be ready, let alone meeting the capital S self, let alone meeting the witness that's witnessing the witnesser. That's the self that's outside. So maybe the conscious self, as I call it, and then transcending the conscious self to different dimensions of being where we no longer become body. But ultimately, that comes back to, what the hell are we doing on this plane? And who are you? Who are you? And who do you want to be? In my prayer, I always say, maybe walk gently on this earth.
I love that.
So if you choose to walk gently on this earth, there's a path. You just have to choose it. But I want to really open up the conversation, because ultimately what I want to do in the future is to teach through learning, through the experience self with IFS therapists or any therapist. This is truly the nature of the medicine. But first, let's uncap your mind and open the can of your mind and your body, and let's look. And then you can start to understand the nature. Because I'd love to teach this ultimately, but I'd like to be in a position in the future, as I am starting now, not only to work and help people one-on-one, but to speak publicly about this, because I don't want people to get fucked up, Tammy, because I've seen a lot of people get fucked already.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that was your experience, which is why you're so passionate about making sure these medicines are used in a correct way for healing for people that are
Yeah.
seeking.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you just said? Because what you just said about what I'm getting from what you just said is giving people an experience, like taking the cap off, is you facilitating an experience with someone so then they have their own relationship with the medicines. And
Well,
I feel
that
like, go ahead.
go on. Sorry to interrupt, please.
Well, so, no, that's okay. So, and I was thinking that like that's what we do in IFS is we do our own work. So I know what it's like to work with my parts and have, unburden my parts and have self energy. And, I know what those experiences are like because I've done my work, so that when I'm sitting with someone, I can facilitate them in the IFS protocol because I've done my work. So I think that's what you're saying, is that like, yeah, go ahead.
Well, what I wish to do, is to open up the dialogue again with the world of therapists about the nature, as I found it, about this work, and the sacredness, the importance of how to treat these medicines with respect, and ultimately the respect that needs to be conferred on the seekers. Okay.
Yeah.
I people ask me, what do you do? I don't call myself a shaman. I don't call myself a therapist by any stretch of the imagination. I was trying to think about what is it that I do. And it's nebulous, but the one thing that I've come to is, and this may be a grandiose term, but I haven't come to a better one, and I'm open to anything, honestly, but you're like a soul doula.
Do you think the nature of the medicines is different than the nature of, like, say, working within the IFS model, or doing other things? The nature of the medicines do some speak say see if you can speak to that for me. Like the nature of the medicines, what is it about them that are so special and sacred that they are? Yeah, talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
Well, there's a term called an adaptogen. So there's medicines that know what you need, and oftentimes skilled and respectful facilitators will say it's not what you want from the medicine, but it's what the medicine wants from you. You may not get what you want, but you will get what you need. So what the hell does that mean? So as I said, the medicines can open you up and show you things that you do not want to see. And certainly from my own experience, having to unfortunately relive some of the most horrific things that should ever happen to a human being.
And so that's the power of the need to respect the medicine and have a
Absolutely.
relationship with the medicine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And not every medicine is appropriate for every person. That's one thing that's very, very critical for me to communicate to the audience. Just because psilocybin is there doesn't mean you need to take psilocybin. It may not be the right medicine for you because you may not be ready for it.
How do people know, right? If that's sort of the only thing available in their state, or
that's troublesome. That's troublesome because in my experience and in my view, for instance, working with someone who's borderline, their parts get really disorganized with psilocybin because psilocybin opens it up, right? So the witness is there, but then these protective parts and everyone turns up, and these are very polarizing parts, and they freak out. And then they start to project that onto you, and it turns into a big mess. Okay. Whereas if you work with them with MDMA, for instance, it's very hard opening, it's softening, and you can. I've done work with people where they've regressed back to when they're 5, and then they go meet with their exile and unburdening, retrieval, all that stuff happens in a really beautiful way. So that is one of the primary examples of just because the medicine is there doesn't mean you need to take it. I always say this to people. That's why I work with various types of medicine, because not one medicine is appropriate for one person. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's critical to understand and explain.
And my guess is people don't have I don't know this, but my guess is people don't have the option. They're just sort of like, here's what's available in my area, or here's, so, and they don't know. They don't know what the differences may be.
Well, the troubling thing, again, addressing it from a reductionist, scientific, materialistic outlook on, okay, so what does whatever the psilocybin do to the DMN network, and where you can go in the amygdala and reduce the stress response to pain, blah blah blah, and all that, and that's valid, right? And that may be synthetic, and they do those things, but again, this can open up different portals of consciousness for which the reductionist scientific view has no language, much less be able to work with. Okay, so what's troubling again is they approach it from a very superficial understanding of what these things do, these substances, or these whether they're organic or synthetic. Okay, they're a lot deeper, and as I said, without losing the audience, there's different layers of consciousness and awareness that we can attune to. And if someone opens someone's can and they have no idea what the hell is happening, it can again re-traumatize this person. So there's a huge trauma that lives underneath all of these traumas that are rising up, and there's an explosion and major backlash. So it has to be considered very carefully. And again, we're in this very interesting place where certain states, certain substances are available. There are people that are well-meaning that are working with these substances, but I wouldn't be paid $1 million to go sit with them. And I hearing this again through friends of mine who work in integrity, who work with ketamine, who are working above ground, who I respect. And there's basically one who works at UCLA, and friends who have received ketamine through various clinics. And it's abhorrent to me to hear what their practices are. And this is just with ketamine. Okay.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes the seeker or the quote unquote patient has to understand what questions to ask, has to understand how to feel safe and understand the nature of this work. The problem with the clinical model is there is a patient and a doctor relationship. There's a division of power. The person who's been traumatized has always lost their power. And then they go and submit themselves essentially to someone who was in a powerful position, submit their bodies and say, do what you will, because I'm at the end of my rope. And hopefully that helps. But this is a relationship that should be equal. It's an egalitarian relationship, and it's an egalitarian relationship not only with the seeker, the facilitator / doctor, but then the medicine. And that is not even addressed, right? So there are a lot of illnesses, if you will, in the way things are practiced that I find very, very troublesome. So then what other solution do people have? Then they have to find someone who is truly of integrity, who's working underground.
Mm.
And people need to do the due diligence. I certainly won't advise on that.
So how can people contact you if they're intrigued and have questions and want to have conversations with you? I think you're inviting that. You're inviting conversation. So how would you like people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say first and foremost, again, thank you. Whoever has a podcast, whoever is interested in publicly speaking about my work, whether they have other questions or they want me to focus on something specific, I'm available unless I'm on the mats in ceremony, in which case I'm not in this world. But people can certainly reach out to me if they're very intent on this work, because my time is also limited. So I'd like people to respect that. But people can find me on the web. It's just www.payam, my first name.com, or on Instagram. They can see a little bit of my treatments, and that's at Payam, Payam _healing. So those are the two modes of people being able to reach out to me. And I'm sure you'll leave the details also on the podcast.
Yes.
Notes.
And then tell me about the workshop you have coming up.
Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to connect with some world-renowned surgeons, people who work in the field of chronic pain, who understand my work, who trust me. And through them, I was able to basically offer a 4-day experiential. It's a ceremony. It's basically a ceremony, but I don't work with ketamine. So my friend, whose name is Weevo, who's at UCLA, very respected, he's a spirit brother of mine. He's going to be working with ketamine. So we're going to be working with ketamine, opening the body up. Then depending on the group, again, it's all about group and group dynamics where people are at. We will definitely be working with MDMA, possibly with psilocybin and some other shamanic medicines that I won't mention. But my goal is, first of all, to help people themselves open up. Physicians, doctors, they have a lot of trauma. You name it, they have it, and they subdue that with alcohol. That's their number one poison. So to help them release some stuff, and also then again understand the nature of these medicines, and hopefully again build dialogue and build community of people from Western, non-Western, and shamanic traditions who are in integrity and who truly understand the nature of this work, want to understand themselves through it, and want to offer this to people who are in tremendous amount of suffering. And no other means of alleviating suffering has been found. So we go and understand the root of their suffering, which ultimately is childhood trauma that's been trapped in the body, not processed, and then new traumas from surgery, other events that trigger those traumas, and the brain's already primed, the amygdala is already really activated, and going in underneath and uprooting essentially, or finding the thorn in the soul, as I call it, and healing that, which alleviates a lot of the more superficial, or it shifts our relationship with more of the superficial traumas that may be existing in our bodies.
Healing the thorn in our soul. I love it. Anything else you want to say before we end? Anything else you want the listeners to know?
My endless gratitude. And yeah, I would certainly like to have a conversation with Richard in person. I've done a lot of workshops and whatever, but Derek Scott, Richard Schwartz, Gabor, if you're listening, Frank, let's sit for a drink, but non-alcoholic. Let's sit with medicine and brotherhood, and find means of helping people, because these medicines will be available. So I certainly want to encourage us to open up dialogue and see how we can work from the wisdom that we all have, so that we can help those who will steward these medicine and hopefully help others fully heal.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy, and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.